Hey, everybody. John Bush here, the Live Free Now show and the Conscious Resistance Network. And today I want to talk to you about coronavirus and the opportunity that this pandemic, this crisis, this authoritarian response, this economic calamity presents for freedom lovers, free thinkers, innovators, entrepreneurs, activists to create new systems, decentralization, to get back to harmony with Mother Earth, to create alternative social organizations that aren't based on coercion and top-down hierarchies. And I'm going to share some tips and tools on how we can do all this. So some analysis, some insight, but also some practical tips and tools that you can utilize in your life. I often use the quote from Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. And most definitely those in power, the centralizers, the shadow government are taking advantage of this opportunity in order to create more centralization, more coercion, more control. And they have an agenda and they're carrying it out. And so we have an opportunity as well to not let this crisis go to waste. People are not happy with how things are going. And when this is all over, or at least the heat of it is over, people are going to be in a haze, like with the little birdies going, and they're going to be like, oh my God, what just happened? And they're going to be broke, out of work. Economies are going to crash. We may never get back to a new normal, which is good because the old way of doing things wasn't ideal either, right? We definitely want to get back to a normal where people have the freedom of movement, freedom of association, and the freedom to earn a living. But we don't want to get back to the old normal of coercion, control, raping the land, harming one another, big government, police state, surveillance state. So it's up to us activists to take advantage of the opportunity. And I'm going to share exactly how we can do that as individuals and as a community. Now, I want to start with an awesome quote by Buckminster Fuller. Can't go wrong with this innovative design guru. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And man, that is some good stuff there. I caught on to this vibe early on in my activism. I've been an activist since 2002. Back then I was sharing the truth about what happened on 9/11 and trying to wake people up to the centralized New World government totalitarian agenda. And early on I had an affinity for the Constitution, not so much now. It created more government than there was before. But I got involved in political activism through the Ron Paul campaign and the 2008 Ron Paul presidential campaign, learned about libertarianism and did a lot of political activism, a lot of successful political activism. But I realized that working within that system, even what we saw as a victory for freedom, in reality, we didn't create more freedom. Rather, we slowed the growth of control, tyranny, and government. And so I started to really think like, man, we got to be doing things differently, thinking outside the box and creating alternative institutions. This is around the time, 2008, 2009, that I really began to have a love and adoration and desire to further create alternative institutions to educate people about these alternatives. Early on, we were doing like silver dimes as an alternative to the Federal Reserve note, right? And I would say, if you want to end the Fed, then stop using the Federal Reserve notes as much as you possibly can, right? This was even before cryptocurrency, which is another example of an alternative institution that's decentralized. So the way things are happening now, top-down, hierarchical, centralized, are not working. And specifically in a few different areas. Number one, the economy. We see that we are I don't like to say we, right? Because it's not my debt and it's not my kids' debt, especially, maybe it's the state has better of a chance to extract some wealth from me, but my kids don't have social security numbers, and I'm hoping they're going to be as sovereign as possible for as long as possible. But we have this debt that's about to be $25 trillion. Isn't that absolutely ridiculous? And the way that this institution works in its top-down, hierarchical, centralized way is, I think it's really illustrated well from this picture here. Where is it? This picture here. As you can see, you have those in power at the top, represented by this all-seeing eye that you can find on the back of the US dollar to rub it in your face. Then you have these really powerful families that have been in power for quite some time and have a whole lot of royal blood and have been dominating human beings for centuries. One of them that always comes to mind, of course, is the Rockefeller family, the Rothschilds as well. There's other families, of course, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, and there's even families we probably don't even know about. But then you have these rich, powerful people, and I don't think that being rich is a bad thing by itself. It has the Committee of 300 up here. This is where you'll find all sorts of power players that have had an agenda and a plan for centuries, right? I always talk about the need for an Illuminati of liberty. And we got to understand that those that are carrying out their agenda, the globalists, as old Alex Jones says, or the Illuminati, or the powers that be, or the Anglo-American establishment for our Western world experience, they have a long-term plan, an intergenerational plan. And that's another thing I learned about the political activism and this next level activism, post-political activism, is that when you are just looking at the next 4 years, the next election, that's your little sphere of influence. You got to think outside the box, think bigger. We got to have an Illuminati of liberty to create a long-term plan, a long-term agenda to carry out the creation of these alternative institutions. We got to think outside the box. Thankfully, when cryptocurrency came along, a bunch of radical anarchists became millionaires, multimillionaires all of a sudden. I think there is some of this stuff taking place now more so than ever. But this is the centralized top-down pyramid. You have the think tanks, the United Nations, World Health Organizations, Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission. You have World Financial Control, the central banks, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. They collect stuff through tax revenue. You have resource control through IMF and all these globalist institutions. Then you have these multinational corporations that have all sorts of privilege and economic financial funny money. They get bailed out. Then you have population control, and you have global governance, and it's not just all coming from the global institution, but the global institution gets buy-in from the national government, whether it's the EU or United Nations environmental programs that even city governments sign into. Then you have your governments that are really just puppets of all these Illuminati families and stuff. They have the mechanism of coercion and control through the law enforcement, which makes them so powerful. Of course, we have the media that's just completely propagandizing people. The public schools are really what makes for a docile servant public that is not very quick to think outside the box, to think critically, that stands up and gives pledge allegiance to the flag, that has presidents, pictures of presidents. That's who you worship. Not often big thinkers. And when it is big thinkers, it's the thinkers that the establishment wants you to know about, not the Nikola Teslas, for example. And then you have the debt slaves, the cattle, the chattel, who in reality, a lot of people are like automatons. They're like drones that just carry out the program from the television, program from previous generations, from parents, from the desire to fit in and be normal and not be different, because then you get ridiculed in school and your parents feel ashamed, and so they mold you in. And a lot of people, they're literally just carrying out the program. And we see this taking place, especially now with the coronavirus. It's been taking place, but we see the talking points that people are spewing out, like the Trump drink disinfectant, drink Lysol bleach, inject Lysol bleach, right? He didn't say that, but now you have people believing that he said that because the media tells them what to think and what to believe. And they're just carrying out a program. They're just going along to get along without that consciousness. And if people want to reach enlightenment or become self-aware, self-conscious, right? It's the conscious resistance, like the Conscious Resistance Network. It takes taking a consciousness out of the program and examining what it is that you're thinking, how you're living, so on and so forth, right? That's a necessary step in all of this. But I want to point out that the debt slaves, in large part, and even myself and you free thinkers that are watching this are included in this in large part. We're all playing our own part in the program. And then you have the Derek Broses of the world. That's like, F this, I'm out of here to Mexico. We're going to build our little alternative there. But, you know, we all do our best. So, but this is the centralized top-down hierarchy. And this leads us to all sorts of problems, not only with the economy, but also with food production systems. We have food shortages that are taking place. Stores, supermarkets could see shortages for over a year. Save your bacon, a real meat shortage looms with virus shutdowns. This is all news from just a day ago. The food production systems were already vulnerable as it is. And now with the coronavirus and whole plants having to close down and China not being able to export as much as they were before, we see the opportunity for much more problems. And then on top of that, we have authoritarian governments that have, you know, this is where the rubber meets the road. This centralized BS allows for the creation and the subservience to a system like this. I mean, this is scary stuff, what the police and law enforcement has become. This is what centralization brings us. Centralization also brings us the worst of the worst, war. This would not be possible were it not with centralization. You know, there were warring tribes before, but the warring tribes didn't tax the entire public through a centralized hierarchy of control and use that money. So you have the debt slaves, to go back to our image before. We have these debt slaves that are, and this is something Stefan Molyneux pointed out, right? He went far right wing, kind of off the rails, in my opinion. But early on, he had some really great stuff. Like The Story of Your Enslavement talked a lot about how we're all cattle on a plantation, a farm, a tax farm. But one thing that he really pointed out that stuck with me was before you had coercive authoritarian governments and dictatorships, right? And they controlled everything. And then you had the communist experience with the Soviet Union. China is an exception because they have like a communist capitalist hybrid, right? But you had authoritarian regimes, communist regimes, and they would control the population and not let the free market flourish. But what we see taking place with the American experience was a phenomenon whereby there existed the central government, the top-down control, and perhaps it is even worse because there's a quote, none are more enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. But what we have in the American experience with relative freedom to other authoritarian governments, current and in history, is we have that economic freedom that enables the greater extraction of financial resources, which work its way up to the war machine. And it's this centralized system of governance that has allowed for some of the most perverse, disgusting, pathetic, horrible atrocities to ever take place. And that's what we see with the experience of war, war throughout history, modern wars. This stuff wouldn't be possible were it not for the centralized institution of government. So I just wanted to point that out. And now I'm going to talk about how we can shift. So we're going to get down into food production. We're going to get down into economic alternatives. We're going to talk about decentralization as it applies to all of these areas. And then finally, we're going to finish up with a alternative means of social organization, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, it is the institution of the state, coercive, hierarchical, monopolistic in nature, that is really limiting and hindering human flourishing and our ability to exist harmoniously and peacefully with our fellow human beings. It shouldn't be so nasty and disgusting, and we shouldn't be taken advantage of in these coronavirus times either. So we're going to talk more about the problem, and we're definitely going to focus a whole lot on the solution, because after all, that's what it's all about. And each and every individual that's watching this has the opportunity, the ability to make these changes, to participate in the creation of a better world. And it's up to each and every one of us to do just that. And that's what we're going to do. So the food production system is all out of whack. And the way that it works now is we have a provider that grows the farms. And to get back to the damn Rockefeller family, it was actually the Rockefeller Foundation that created the genesis of modern agriculture with the monocropping in mass, which of course the pesticides and the whole glyphosate and that whole industry grew along with that. What I want to present as an opportunity, as an alternative, and what I want to see flourish is the idea of permaculture. So before we have this centralized system that isn't in line with nature, that is not in harmony with nature, that in many ways is an antithesis to nature. There's a reason why they have to spray so many chemicals on the monocrops in order to get them go, because the soil has been completely depleted and bastardized in all reality. And they have to have chemicals and fertilizers and all sorts of nonsense. And the fertilizer gets imported from over here, and the phosphate company in Florida has to import it over here. It's a wreck, and it's not sustainable, and it's not ideal, and it doesn't produce good food. It's no wonder so many people die from things like COVID-19, because everyone's unhealthy. Most people are unhealthy, and don't, especially in the West here. But so this is how the typical system works. You got your provider, oftentimes overseas. The provider of the seeds, GMO seeds. Your producer, it's got to be taken somewhere. We're using petrol, oil, big supply chains, and commercial travel and driving. Then it gets distributed out to a distribution center, finally makes it to the retailer, the grocery store, and finally on down to the consumer. And this isn't ideal. From an environmental perspective, this is harmful. From a resiliency perspective, when the rubber meets the road, we need our food. And because this means of providing food for the masses is so unsustainable and so fragile and so centralized, it creates an opportunity for all sorts of problems when we see these pandemics pop up and when we see them be sensationalized and exploited by the media and the powers that be. So what's an alternative? An alternative is permaculture, which is more of a synergistic means of life, not just growing food, but also a way of living where we can be in harmony with Earth, with ourselves, with our fellow human beings. These are the 12 principles of permaculture: observe and interact, catch and store energy, self-regulation, accept feedback, accountability, slow solution, slow farming, slow growth, not having to rely on external sources, being shipped all around the globe, diversity, patterns in nature, produce no waste, and creatively use and respond to change. And really what it's all about is working with the land and working with Earth and not working against it. And it's a really humbling philosophy in that it doesn't have the human at the top of the pyramid, with it being totally acceptable for the human to exploit the different resources, to exploit the animals, to exploit everything else. I'm not a vegan. I love me some meat, but I sure take every opportunity to get ethically raised, hormone-free, free range when it comes to chickens and stuff. And there is a way, in my opinion, to live harmoniously with animals as well, not to exploit the animals, not to pack all the chickens and the pigs in the factory farm. And this is a way of doing things that I see is going to have a renaissance. Victory gardens were a big thing during the Great Depression and the World War II times. And we already see a resurgence of this. Even myself, like I got deep into gardening and survivalism after the 2007, like in 2006 is when I really started to see that, wow, this system is totally fragile and could collapse. And I thought there was going to be a financial collapse imminent that would lead to a total societal collapse. Well, there was a financial calamity, Great Recession that did take place. It didn't lead to a total societal collapse. We may see that with the Great Depression or huge recession ensuing after all of this crazy financial stuff and economic stuff from the coronavirus. But I got way into food production and moved on to a 2.5 acre farmstead. And at one point had 120 chickens that were just popping out the eggs. And we would trade the eggs for silver dimes. We'd say a dime a dozen, or we would trade them for food at the farmer's market. And we had like 15 hugelkultur raised garden beds and all sorts of raised garden beds in the backyard. And I was really heavy duty into the water storage, the food storage, preserving the seeds. And then I started to rest on my laurels, really because I wanted to grow more financially, and there were some financial struggles, and I kind of rested on the laurels there. But for me personally, someone that has a foundation and roots in growing your own food and living in harmony with nature, this whole scenario that's playing out has caused me to come back into this. And so I want to encourage you, whether you've been involved in the past or whether you've never grown your own food or planted tomatoes in the back, I want to encourage you to start doing that now. There's never been a better time than now. And if you are somebody that's already deeply involved, you already are very familiar with permaculture, you grow your own food, I want to encourage you to help others and to teach others and to spread this knowledge and wisdom. And just for a couple quick tips on some great ways to start, there's a book called Square Foot Gardening, and it's super simple. Really great way to do high yield growing of food. And you can get it on Amazon, get it wherever. Go to squarefootgardening.org, and they talk about setting up your raised bed garden beds with square foot. And then there's certain plants that need a certain amount of space. They also talk about companion planting, which is another great place to start. So companion planting is the idea that there's certain plants, vegetables that do well and are harmonious with other plants, and they're called the companions, and there's certain other ones that don't do well. These are called antagonists. And one great example is what's called Three Sisters, which was an early Native American way of growing things, and it's corn, beans, and squash. And you can see here, the corn requires plenty of space to grow. Beans need support systems for the stalks to go straight. They grow up the corn. And both squash and corn thrive on nitrogen, which typically does not flourish in sandy soils. And it's the beans that provide the nitrogen for the corn and the squash. And the nitrogen does as well. Corn offers string beans a sturdy support to grow straight. String beans absorb nitrogen from the surrounding air and replenish nitrogen-deficient soil. Sprawling squash creates copious amounts of mulch that cools and moistens the soil. Squash leaves also contain prickly stems that thwart the best attempt of critters, such as raccoons, from enjoying sumptuous meals. And so that's the harmony, the synergy of permaculture that we can tap into. So go out there, get yourself the Square Foot Gardening book. Go out there and learn about permaculture. There's also a book, they talk about double digging. I forget what it's called. It's an awesome book. Let me see if I can get the name of it real quick. Backyard Food Production Systems. What is it called? How to Grow More Vegetables Than You Ever Thought Possible. Yes, this is it. How to Grow More Vegetables Than You Ever Thought Possible on Less Land Than You Can Imagine. This is a wonderful work that talks about all sorts of awesome methods of growing food. Here it is on Amazon. It's been out since 1995. And when I go out and grow food, I have my companion planting guide. I have this book here that actually has all the companion planting stuff in it. And then I have my Square Foot Gardener. And then you just Google or find, this is what the front of the cover used to look like when we used to sell it over at Brave New Books. And then there was this edition. And then you go and you find your local gardening guide, and it talks about the seasons, and it talks about what plants and vegetables are in season. So that's how you can start growing your own food. This is absolutely important. One thing that you can do as well is start shopping at your local farmer's market. We went to the farmer's market and did a little social distancing. It was kind of awkward having to wear a mask. They wouldn't let you inside without a mask, but wearing a mask at this outdoor public space seemed a little bit silly. But nonetheless, we contributed and supported and got some local farm fresh produce and even sold some masks to some of the farmers we're friends with there. And so that not only is getting the food from a local source, is in line with permaculture, is more sustainable, is less fragile, because if the food supply chain completely collapses, then you're in trouble. But it's also an example of decentralizing an economy where you're not relying on the grocery store that's corporately owned, that imports all the food and that has stuff in China and all so on and so forth. And so these are things that everyone can do. It's not controversial. It's not illegal yet. And it's things that can really change our world. And again, so there's an opportunity here where everyone's like, oh my God, I'm so scared. The toilet paper's gone. There's no food. The fresh food isn't there. And everyone's like, this sucks. What are we going to do? I don't want to have to do this again. It presents an opportunity for we activists, free thinkers, liberty lovers to be like, hey, there's another way of doing things. We'd like to invite you to give it a try. And on that token, let's talk a little about the financial system. We talked about the debt earlier. It's almost $25 trillion, which is absolutely nuts. We have a system, the banking, the financial funny money, which is fraudulent, fractional reserve banking. All these banks only have to have 10% on reserve. They can then lend out the other 90%, creating inflation. There's favoritism. Whenever there's bailouts with the Federal Reserve Bank at the discount window, it goes to the large firms first. There's all these entitlement programs. That money's just being deficit spent that then gets added on to the debt. There's governments that can leverage against other governments and get them to do their bidding. There's wars that are fought over all these financial instruments and the bullshit with the oil. And we want to use the euro now. Now we're going to kill you, Libya and Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. And the centralized financial institution is no good, if for anything, in a utilitarian perspective, because your wealth and your savings gets stolen through the hidden tax called the inflation tax, which Dr. Ron Paul talked a lot about. Good old G. Edward Griffin, Creature from Jekyll Island, talks about. The Austrian School of Economics talks about. When they create more money, of which they've printed around $6 trillion since this coronavirus crisis has taken place, when they add that money to the monetary supply, it dilutes the value of the money supply. It's a simple supply and demand equation whereby the more of something that you have, the more supply of money you have, the less it's worth. If you have 50,000, maybe you've been a good citizen, a good American citizen, you got $20,000 saved up in the bank. They're printing $6 trillion. By the time that money trickles down throughout the economy, first being given to those privileged firms that get the bailout from the discount window, being able to use that money before the effective inflation takes place, trickles all the way down. Now it's diluted the value of your money. And before you know it, you're having to spend $7.50 on a gallon of milk when you used to pay $2.50. And we see this exactly taking place. This isn't some crazy theory that could happen. This has already been happening. And if you look at that wonderful chart on the value of the dollar since 1913, it's the dollar's worth like 10 cents or $1 less than what it was worth in 1913 since the Federal Reserve was instituted. So from a utilitarian perspective, this centralized funny money sucks and doesn't benefit anyone except for those in power. And from an ethical, philosophical perspective, the Federal Reserve Note and the income tax institution that was also instituted in 1913, mind you, as was the 17th Amendment, which did away with state senators, the U.S. Senate being elected by the state government, which would at least created some semblance of federalism. Instead, it was popularly elected now, so the federal government can maintain more control. Whereas before, the U.S. senators were beholden to the state government, right? That was all created in 1913. The income tax system, like we talked about earlier with the pyramid and the debt slaves and the tax slaves at the bottom, we're just financing our own oppression, and we're financing those foreign wars of aggression. This system has got to stop. It's got to break. There's other ways to do things. Now, I will say this with the disclaimer that cryptocurrency and Bitcoin has in some ways been bastardized and regulated in some ways, but there do still exist currencies like Monero, for example, XMR, which is pretty much impossible to crack and trace. And that's even the currency that the FBI and the Department of Justice, they're really concerned with that one, right? And again, I do want to preface this by also saying that now we see the United States government, it was even in the CARES Act, apparently, that they want to create a digital dollar. And there is an opportunity. Remember, there's always opportunities, right? And just like a gun is a tool that a statist can use to coerce and control people, a gun is also a tool that a free person can use to protect themselves, not only from private criminals, but from public criminals like governments. As we're going to talk about with freedom cells and enough people banding together with guns, we can actually have a pretty decent show of force where we can hopefully throw off those chains of oppression and step outside the box. But cryptocurrency is a tool. And yes, that tool can be used to create a one world digital currency, but that tool can also be used to create decentralized peer-to-peer money that isn't controlled by any central institution. And that, my friends, is the beauty of cryptocurrency. It doesn't have to be cryptocurrency. That's just one opportunity. For all you haters out there, cryptocurrency was created by the NSA, so on and so forth. First of all, that's not true. It's possible that it's true, but it's highly unlikely. Though, how about the local Dillo dollar, as it used to be in Austin, or Ithaca hours, right? I'm not a fan of tying 1 hour of labor to $1 or 1 unit of measure. And then that's how it works. That's kind of an egalitarian way of doing things because, for example, the doctor that just got out of medical school, his hour is worth less than the doctor that's been practicing for 40 years and has seen it all and just can do a smell test on an infection and know what it is. But I digress. Either one, whatever. The idea is to decentralize, decouple ourselves, decouple our personal economy, our local economies, our community economy from the Federal Reserve top-down hierarchical centralized system, not only for practical purposes, because that one is exploited, manipulated, inflated, leveraged, but also for ethical purposes, because it's used in order to finance foreign wars of aggression and finance our own oppression. And on top of that, if we do want to create these alternatives, we need to decentralize them and create those financial ecosystems that aren't dependent on the man. Additionally, those systems, like if you have a bank account, you can be levied if you decide not to pay the man. They can levy your bank account. Well, imagine how liberating it would be to be like, I don't even have a bank account anymore, and I'm still able to provide for myself and my family and get those goods and services that I want and need without even having to use the US dollar, without even having to use your banking system. So levy this, R and the S. Okay, so that's money, that's finances. We've talked about food and how decentralizing would be far more effective. Hey, Becca, will you help me and grab me that power strip there? My computer's dying here, and my lovely lover, Rebecca's here with me, so she's going to help me out. So we've talked about food and how centralization is not helping us. We've talked about economies and how centralization is not helping us. It's in that little black case right there. And now, oh, actually, it's right here. Let me just plug this in. And now we're going to talk about what I think is super exciting and super important, because governance and centralized social organizations are super harmful. Let's talk about decentralized social organization, which is really where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion. First, I want to show you this really cool image that shows an example of decentralized networks, right? So you have centralized, where like this is the government, this is the controlling families, and then everything's top down from there. And then you have decentralized, where the power rests in multiple different areas who are participating. This distributed example is an example of like cryptocurrency, where the ledger and the verification of the authenticity of the transactions that take place on the network is distributed throughout the entirety of the network. Well, we can do this for our social organization. So rather than having a top-down hierarchical means of organizing society, right? I don't even like to use the word government, because the root of that word govern means to rule over, right? And I want to get away from that altogether, because we all want to have self-governance, where we rule over ourselves. And ideally, we rule over our mind and our hearts and that inner voice in our heads too, right? True self-governance, true sovereignty, where we're sovereign from even our own inner demons. But there's alternative ways that we can organize ourselves. And one of these ways is what is called a freedom cell, which is essentially a small group of people, ideally around 8 people, that organizes themselves for mutual benefit, for mutual aid, for common goals, and helps one another. This small group of around 8 people then advocates and encourages the creation of other small groups of around 8 people. When you have enough groups of around 8 people, you form a larger group with all of your groups of 8 people. So let's use the number 10 just because it makes it easier. And by the way, the number 8 is an optimal number for a group, because the 8 is an optimal number for a group of people. A gentleman by the name of Bob Podolsky and John David Garcia, they did a whole lot of research, decades worth of research, and they found that the number 8 is optimal for creativity and effectiveness. Anytime you deviate away from the number 8, to say 5 people, or deviate 5 people, there's not enough creativity, there's not enough ideas to flow, there's not enough people to cooperate. Anytime you deviate on the higher number, there's too many ideas, there's not enough group cohesion. So 8 is the optimal number. Could be 7, could be 9, could be 6, could be 10. Whatever, but if you can get as close to 8 as possible. They also found that when you have an equal number of men and women, it becomes the most effective as well. This doesn't have to be this way, but this is how things are ideal. So imagine, we'll just use the number 10. So imagine you have your group of 10, you work together on common goals. In the coronavirus times, I did a video previously. You have a goal of food storage of up to 3 months. You have a goal of everyone has a firearm and knows how to use it safely and proficiently in defense of themselves, their family, and their community. You have a goal of everyone has a encrypted communication channel, and ideally an off-grid CB radio, for example, shortwave radio. Everyone has a bug-out plan as well, right? So you all work together on common goals. Then you have your group of 10. You agitate for the creation of other groups of 10. This is what I call your inner cadre, by the way. Now you have 10 groups of 10 Those 10 groups of 10 form what's called a middle cadre. And while they're not dedicated to one another as the original group, they are dedicated to the benefit of the group as a whole. Then imagine, and this is like a regional thing. Ideally, you live in the same area, the same geographic area, although that's not necessary. Now imagine you've agitated for the creation. Those 100 people are now telling everyone about this great idea, Freedom Cells. You can go to freedomcells.org and sign up and join a Freedom Cell in your area. There's a map that'll show you how many groups there are. They're already in Australia, in London, and so many states here in the US. Now you have 10 groups of 100, and you form a meta cadre of 1,000. Let's say you have 10 groups of 1,000. Now you have a group of 10,000. And now we see the real opportunity to replace the social safety net that everyone always talks about. As an anarchist, we're always asked, what about the poor people? What about the sick people? What are we going to do to help them, right? First of all, the existing institution doesn't help very much. The war on poverty is totally lost, a total fraud and a scam. The Western centralized top-down government-run healthcare system is a corporatist thing in the West, in the United States of America. It's totally full of fail and all profit motive, profit incentive. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with a profit motive, but when you couple it with government, coercion, regulators, picking winners and losers, it's got all sorts of problems. But let's take an example and say that each one of these groups, we now have 1,000, they all pool their money together and have a fund. It's called a health share. This actually does exist, and I participate in a health share where every month you chip in a certain amount of money, and then if someone has an emergency, that money, that pool is used for that emergency. There's enough money in the fund, it doesn't get depleted. Another way, it could be like a crowdfunding thing. And remember, all these people are dedicated to one another, and there's an understanding of reciprocity. So there could be free rider problems. If there's free riders and some of the individuals aren't contributing, then the other groups of 9 and the group of 100 could be like, hey, there's a couple people in that 8th group that just haven't really been contributing or supporting one another. So we can either help them and give them a hand up and talk to them and encourage them, or we tell this Freedom Cell, hey, you got a few people in your group that haven't contributed. So unless you guys figure that out amongst yourselves, we're going to drop your group of 10 from our middle cadre of 100. So-and-so breaks his leg. They need to crowdfund for it. Everybody in the group of 1,000 chips in $5 or $2.50. And now you have the $2,500 you need to pay the hospital bill. Additionally, within your group of 1,000, within your group of 100, you have a handful of doctors, naturopaths, surgeons, so on and so forth. You go within the own community to take care of such things. This is how we can have a healthcare system that isn't centralized, hierarchical, allopathic, bastardized, pushing vaccines, run for profit, run for control, picking winners and losers. It's decentralized. It's peer-to-peer. It's mutual aid. It's a freedom cell. We can also have security. We can have food, right? So on your small group of 8, you guys all chip in and purchase the storable food together. Or let's say your group of 100 all chips in to purchase the piece of land, whether it's a piece of land that they all move together to create an intentional community, or a plot of land down the road from everyone's house in a central location they can all access, where you start your community garden. Build a big old fence around it and you start your garden where everyone participates. Or maybe somebody already has a large piece of land and everyone chips in for the farming equipment and the plow and all the tools and the seeds, and they all work together to do that. When it comes to storable food, you have a group of 100, everyone contributes, you get bulk food in discount distributed out to your community. This is the real deal, folks. It can work for food production. Maybe you have a farmer within your group of 100 and they train everyone else on how to grow food in their own backyard. Maybe there's 2 or 3 farmers in the group of 100 and everyone else kicks in to help subsidize their operations so they can hire more staff, so they can expand their livestock, and then the food gets distributed again. This is how we can replace the existing system. We can do it now. This isn't illegal. This isn't even difficult. This is something that we are doing. This is something that you can participate in. And this is something that we can encourage others to participate in, because things are totally fucked. They were already fucked really bad before. Now they're even more fucked. And now the whole fuckiness of it all is up in people's faces, and they're having to face with the mirror, like society's looking in the mirror like, oh shit, we really fucked up. This sucks. We let a psychopathic group of pedophile elites take control of the entire society, and they've brainwashed a good majority of the public who are perfectly content to go along with the program. In fact, when we step out of line on the program, the Karens of the world rat us out to the law enforcement authorities. It's straight out of Big Brother. Holy shit, how do we let it get this bad? It's time for a change. You ever have those thoughts in your head like, oh my God, this really sucks? Well, I'm here to tell you that we have options. Option A is sit at the computer, complain about it, argue with people on Facebook, be a little troll and kind of a dick, and like be all like, oh my God, the Illuminati is so powerful and controlling, and Bill Gates and the Rockefellers, they're just so powerful and omnipotent. They're everywhere. There's no way we can do it. Whatever. Just be all like bitter beer face. Or we can step into our power, because we're all infinitely powerful human beings who are yet to even tap into the magic and divinity of our own power. And when you understand that and you realize that and you're empowered and you live a good, healthy life and you start to actually work on these things, there starts to be a little bit of momentum that gets built. Like, man, when you cook a meal and a good half of it or more is from food you grew on your own, that feels really fucking good. When you have your Freedom Cell organization network and it's really pumping and churning, you got your 1,000 people, and the business owner that has the salon says, you know what, this shelter has gone on for too long. I'm going to go ahead and open up. And 20% of that group of 1,200 people, they show up for the first week to support the business and ensure that the government, the police, the enforcers aren't going to shut it down. You have your 200 people, even if it's 100, even if it's freaking 50 people forming a human chain around the building when they come to evict her because she broke the shelter-in law. Man, that's some really powerful shit. And when we start telling people of these stories of success, when we start writing about it, blogging about it, speaking about it on the corner, speaking about it at the party when they let us out of our homes to go party, this is going to be a game changer. We already see this taking place. These networks and people, the rebels, like the Bundy family, for example, they're showing up. This just recently happened where they showed up to the police officer's house that arrested a mom that was at a park in front of her kids. And they showed up and were like going toe to toe with these law enforcement officers. It's going to reach a point where the people go in and extract the officer, pull him out, and do a citizen's arrest or whatever. But this is all, we're all on the precipice of this, of creating the free society we all yearn for. And what, like Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I wanted to share some solutions, some opportunities. The system we have now is centralized, hierarchical, top-down, control. It is fragile. It is not resilient. It is not in line with human nature in that we're all free, sovereign human beings who have a free will to live life according to our own ends, to carry out our own destiny. It's not in line with that. It's also not in line with Mother Nature in that it's the raping of the land. It's the exploitation of human beings as tax slaves, right? It's the giant tanker ship that's coming all across the earth just to supply some grains that could have been grown down the road. It's not working. It's failing. And the emperor wears no clothes. And because of this crisis, a little layer has been peeled. And I already said that it's going to have to get a lot worse before it gets better. And it's going to have to get a lot worse before the American public are capable or are pushed to the point where they're ready to do something about it. Whether it's a fucking revolution, which I, for one, don't revolution. I want revolution. I want peaceful evolution. But people are fed up. The existing institutions are failing. And it's time for us to present the alternative that hopefully can rise up and replace the existing institutions. The people aren't comfortable. And here's another thing. The masses, the Karens, they may continue to carry on the program as we see so many people doing, especially left-leaning Democrats. They're just carrying on the program. Maybe they feel comfort inside with the nanny state and the paternal and the maternal state because they had some stuff going on in their childhood or something, and they just see mom and dad and the government. I don't know what the hell it is, but they may carry out the program. The masses may carry out the program. We see these conservatives and Trump supporters rising up now and rebelling against the shelter-ins and stuff. They're going to rebel in that area, but they're still going to carry out the program for war and controlling people and controlling people's bodies and so on and so forth. But guess what? The masses never, ever have changed the course of history. It's always been those tiny, irate minority keen to set brush fires of liberty in the minds of men on the outsides of society. Now, in a yin-yang inverse way, we have that tiny group of despotic, pedophile, elite psychopaths. They are shifting the course of history. But we also have this tiny group, which is growing, of freedom-loving human beings that have access to information through the internet, that have been exposed to the ideas of decentralization, mutual aid, peer-to-peer, permaculture, freedom. We have people that have tasted freedom, that have lived freedom, and that want it bad. And so the masses, it's possible that we can create an appealing system, an appealing way of doing things that maybe feels a little bit more in line with their nature than this top-down hierarchical, go to war, blow stuff up, control people, drones, spraying disinfectant through the sky, right? And that's what agorism talked about through the different phases. The agorist can work through the counter economy to create an alternative that's more appealing. And that, my friends, is our mission. And that, my friends, I hope gives you a glimmer of hope that we can carry this out, that we can be successful, that we can create the society that we all want and need. Now, I want to let you know it's not going to be easy. It may not even happen in our lifetimes. It may not happen in my children's lifetimes. This is a intergenerational struggle. But the price of liberty is in eternal vigilance. And I know that if you're watching this channel, you're committed to the cause. So I want to invite you to take, even if it's baby steps. Maybe you're just a casual observer of the conscious resistance or of these free-thinking, crazy radicals. I want to invite you to start taking action, not just to watch the videos, not just to share the videos, not just to do your social media thing, but to go out, get your hands dirty, dig the garden, share these ideas in public, in the streets, with your friends, with your family, with your neighbors. Go to freedomcells.org. There's a website for the Freedom Cell movement. It's called freedomcells.org. Freedom cells are peer-to-peer groups organizing themselves in a decentralized manner with the collective goal of asserting the sovereignty of group members through peaceful resistance and the creation of alternative institutions. You can sign up, and when you sign up, you have access to the Freedom Cell network. You can share what skills you have. You can tell us what area you're in, and there's a map, and you can find if there's Freedom Cell groups in your area. There's also a whole series of educational videos. This is the real deal, folks. We're not just talking about it. We're not just theorizing. We are inviting you to participate in the creation of a better world. And it's going to be a beautiful thing. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be fun. And it's going to be rewarding. And it's our obligation. If you believe in the principles of liberty, if you believe that we as human beings deserve better, then it's up to each and every one of us to create that future that we all deserve. This is John Bush. Peace and freedom. Thank you for so much for tuning in. I invite you to support the Brave Health Store if you want to get some colloidal silver. Really great. Antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal. We got some colloidal silver-based hand sanitizer. You want to clean those hands when you're touching all sorts of stuff. We got Zap and Echinacea. Immune-boosting supplements, tinctures with all sorts of herbs, garlic, onion, all sorts of good stuff. We got vitamin D3. We got zinc. We have vitamin C, all things that are good. Use the link below, and not only can you get all these great things, but you'll support the Conscious Resistance Network as well. All right, this is John Bush signing off. Thank you so much for watching. Peace and freedom. I'm out. Bye.